Don't blame seed oils if the problem is the fact that you're eating chicken nuggets for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, something like that. You can't assume it's one component that's causing the problem. Even those studies are very hard to do, especially for 5, 6 years. They count heart attacks in both groups, that kind of thing. And you'd probably have to have 10 or 20,000 people in each group, which is kind of the standard size of a big randomized trial with a drug. It's much harder to do. It's especially to have people maintain that diet for that much time. So we're dealing with a question that can't really be in practice because it's too expensive. In
Yeah.
practice, we can never do the study we really want to do.
All right. Well, it is a real pleasure to have Dr. Bill Harris on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Zora. This is great.
I'm really excited about this, and I'm not just saying this. Sometimes people just say that. I'm excited for this episode because I heard you on Simon Hill's episodes podcast, and he's a guy out in Australia. If nobody knows who he is, just I'll have him in the show notes. I think he's brilliant. And you discussed about seed oils, vegetable and seed oils, and are they good? Are they bad? And what I really do appreciate is your expertise and your thought into this, as well as Simon. He's very prolific in all the research, and I obviously cannot, I'm not at his level, but we're going to break down some of this because in my world, there's a lot of food fear mongering and
Mm-hmm.
it drives me nuts. So I kind of want to take a step back and say, let's look at the science. Let's see what the science says. And even though when we hear this seed oil stuff that it was a good, bad, inflammatory, non-inflammatory. It sounds very sciencey. It sounds very convincing. And
Yeah.
so when I heard you on Simon, I was like, okay, wait, this is a leading expert, somebody who's really studying, doing the research. I think you've researched over 300, you have over 300 research papers, right? So kind of a lot of work you've done.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yes,
you
you
stay in
have.
this long enough, you think things accumulate, right?
It does. So you got a lot of knowledge in the space. So I want to break down some of the information that we're hearing and then what you are seeing in your own research and what it does and what we should be knowing as women going through this menopause transition who are very concerned about heart health, what we should know about vegetable and seed oil. So maybe first kind of take a little step back and give us a brief overview on essential fatty acids and what role they have in the body.
Sure, great. So with essential fatty acids, of course, are fats. If you think about butter, that's a solid fat. You think about a bottle of vegetable oil, that's a liquid fat. Sometimes we call the liquid ones oils and the solid ones fats, but it's all the same stuff. Basically, it's just different. The fatty acids, which are the major component of fats, are either what we call saturated or unsaturated, which is a term that doesn't make any sense to most people, but that's where it came from chemistry. In any event, unsaturated fatty acids are like monounsaturates or polyunsaturates, meaning there's one or two double bonds in the fatty acid chain. It's just a long chain of carbon atoms, basically, and there's typically just single bonds between them. If you remember back to your chemistry, sometimes there's double bonds, and that changes the physical properties so that a a oil with or a fat with fatty acids that have lots of double bonds will be liquid. It won't freeze. It won't get solid. The essential fatty acids are only in the polyunsaturated, the unsaturated group. The saturated fatty acids are not essential, meaning you don't have to eat them for your health. Your body can make them. That doesn't mean we don't eat them. We eat quite a bit of the saturated fatty acids. If we eat meats or butter, cheese, those sorts of things are have a lot of saturated fat, but we don't really have to eat them. So we don't in nutrition we say they're not essential in the sense that because we can make them. The polyunsaturated fatty acids, particularly in omega-3 and omega-6, are the two classes of polyunsaturated. And there's one essential fatty acid in each of those groups. On the omega-6 side, we'll talk a lot about this thing called linoleic acid. And on the omega-3 side, there's linolenic acid. There's just an N difference. But they're very similar. They both have 18 carbons. They have two or three double bonds. It's just the configuration of those double bonds that makes one an omega-3 and one an omega-6. So those are, when we talk about essential fatty acids in this discussion, there's only really two, one linoleic acid and the other one being linolenic acid. We may not talk much about the omega-3 side, more about the omega-6 probably, which is by far, I mean, the typical American eats about 15 grams a day from everything we eat of linoleic acid, the omega-6. And we eat maybe 1 gram a day of alpha linolenic, the omega-3, omega-6 fatty acid. So by far, the primary polyunsaturated essential fatty acid in our diet is linoleic acid. So
So
that's what we'll talk about.
let's get, I just want to make sure I understand it right. Linoleic is the omega sixes and
Right,
linolenic is the omega three, correct?
right, correct, right, right. Sometimes, often the omega-3 is called alpha linolenic because there is a gamma linolenic, which it gets confusing.
Yeah, I can get quite deep.
Yeah, and LA, linoleic acid, ALA, alpha linolenic acid. So LA is the one that's, I think, Los Angeles. I don't know. That's the one we'll probably talk most about. That's the one that is primarily provided from seed oils. Okay.
Okay. So we got those clear. And why we do have this tendency to make this omega threes, yay, good, omega six, bad. And it's not quite that way, right? Because you just said linoleic acid, which is omega six, is necessary. It's an essential fatty acid, right? We would die if we didn't have it. Is that correct?
That's correct, right. And I don't think there's no controversy about that fact,
Mm-hmm.
that linoleic acid is an essential fatty acid. The question is, the controversy comes in, well, how much?
Mm.
How much should we eat? Do we eat just enough to prevent classic essential fatty acid deficiency symptoms like scaly skin, increased need for water? Your skin just lets too much water out if you haven't got enough of linoleic. But that doesn't take very much in the diet, maybe less than 1% of your calories, maybe less than, let's say, 5 grams a day, something like that, would be enough to prevent what we'll call essential fatty acid deficiency. A different question is, are higher intakes of linoleic acid than just enough to prevent the classic deficiency symptoms? Are they beneficial or harmful?
Mm.
And I'll take the case. I'll take the position that higher intakes provide benefits in other ways beyond just preventing the essential fatty acid deficiency symptoms. Other people will say we should only take the least amount we need because higher amounts are dangerous and will hurt us. And I think that's the area of controversy.
Yeah, so there's this argument that it's the ratio. Like I've heard Americans have 25 to 1 or ratio of 6 to 3. Some exorbitant numbers. I don't know how true that is or not, but is it really the ratio that matters?
First of all, we'll correct the ratio. The average ratio between omega-6 intake and omega-3 intake in America is 10, 1 to 10.
Okay.
Okay. So people throw around 20, 30, 40, and just they exaggerate outrageously
Mhm.
and make it sound far worse than it is. If you just look
Yes.
at the actual intake data, it's 10 omega-6s to 1 omega-3.
And
Okay.
that's the US only. I mean, do you find that globally as well?
Oh, no, it's going to vary in Spain where you are. It's going to be different because you've got more probably olive oil and you've also, which provides some of the omega-3s and less of the omega-6s. So that ratio, I just don't like the ratio. I just think I just wish it would die and go away because it confuses people. It presumes, I mean, you don't make a ratio of a good thing versus a good thing. It
Hmm.
doesn't make any sense to do that. You usually make a ratio of a good thing to a bad thing,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And so you want to maximize the good, minimize the bad. Yeah, okay, I get that. But the presumption of the omega-6, omega-3 ratio is that the omega-6s are bad. I mean, we have to deal with that assumption first, which
Yeah.
I think is untrue.
Why why do we consider it bad? Where did this come from?
This came from the 1970s and 80s, is where it started. When it was first discovered that basically, so let's back up a little bit. Linoleic acid, the omega-6 fatty acid in the diet, it can be converted, it can be made into a bigger fatty acid called arachidonic acid, which is also an omega-6. And arachidonic acid, of which we eat some, we eat maybe in eggs and meat, you'll get arachidonic acid. And we maybe eat 100 milligrams of that a day. But we can make it from linoleic acid. It can be synthesized. That particular fatty acid, arachidonic, which I'll call AA, it's easier. AA is the precursor, this was discovered in the 70s, the precursor to things we call prostaglandins, leukotrienes. These are largely pro-inflammatory molecules. At least that was at the beginning. That's what they thought. They were pro-inflammatory and they caused blood to clot more readily. Made blood platelets, which is the cells in the blood that help you when you have a cut, help you stop the flow. And so we thought that okay, the omega-6s are the ones that cause those molecules to be made that that are increase inflammation when you need inflammation. We need inflammation when we have a cut because that's part of the healing process. And then we found the omega-3s don't do that. The omega-3 counterparts, which now we're talking about EPA and DHA, which can be made from ALA, the omega-3 essential fatty acid. So we found out that the omega-6s made some of these pro-inflammatory molecules and the omega-3s did not. So there's your balance. The presumption was anything that makes a pro-inflammatory molecule is bad.
Mm,
And
yes.
that's not true.
Uh-huh.
That's way too simple thinking.
Yeah, it's
Um,
kind of like saying inflammation is bad, and what we need
right,
some inflammation to heal the wound, right? It's the chronic
right.
inflammation that's the problem.
It's the chronic ongoing inflammation that is a problem. And the question is, do omega-6 fatty acids promote that kind of inflammation? And that's where people will just extrapolate from that simple observation that they promote the omega-6s promote the synthesis of some inflammatory molecules. They extrapolate from that to they make all inflammatory molecules. And that's not true. They make some anti-inflammatory molecules too. We know now. We didn't know that in the 70s and 80s. Now we know that. So it's far more complicated. And the presumption that omega-6 is bad is really almost based on chemistry more than it is looking at health and wellness and fitness, which is, I think, much more important. You can look at these metabolic charts, which in biology or chemistry class, you'd see these vast systems of every molecule that's made and how they're connected. You look at that and you can get the idea the omega-6s are bad. But if you look at actual health outcomes in humans, they're actually good. So
Yes.
that's kind of where I've been.
So I have to say, there's when listen to some of these podcast episodes demonizing the seed oils, I've heard some of them say, well, it's not the linoleic acid that's the problem. They talk about the oxidation that happens during the pressing and the heating of certain seed oils like safflower, sunflower, canola, corn. And so they're really, I don't think they're demonizing the linoleic, they're just demonizing the process. So is that true that when you heat and pressurize a seed or a vegetable? When I say vegetable, I'm not really sure what they mean when they're doing some kind of
But
vegetable. I guess unless it's corn. Like you see a bottle that
yeah,
just says vegetable oil. I'm not sure what's in there. But what is that true that's happening so that when we actually are ingesting it, because that's where I think the whole inflammation thing comes, where the oil itself is oxidized and then it comes to the body, causes inflammation. We don't need any more of it.
right. I mean that's true. It's many armed approach that people will use to vilify seed oils. And I think they got called animal or vegetable oils because they're not animal and vegetable. I mean,
Um,
they're not from pigs or cows, which are the animal fats. These are the vegetable fats. But seed oils is the proper term because we're not squeezing tomatoes here to make
yeah,
oils. So in any event, yeah, so there is a concern about how processing. I mean, here's another one of the crazy things people get into. If it's processed, it's bad. Well, I mean, that's so stupid. We process our water before we drink it. I mean, we process everything. So now they say, oh, well, ultra process. Well, come on. What's the definition? Let's get specific, not throw around these inflammatory terms that really have no meaning. So that's, as a scientist, that's what bugs me. We're not being precise in any event. So, yeah, you picture your typical fast food restaurant with a vat of boiling oil, vegetable oil, seed oil of some kind, cottonseed or or soybean oil, and the French fries are going in, they're coming out, and the chicken nuggets are going in, they're coming out, and they do this day in and day out. How often do they change that oil? How oxidized does that oil get? What's never Certainly you can find oxidation products in these oils. You can with modern analytical chemistry equipment. You can find one molecule of something in a vast ocean of other molecules that are perfectly fine. And you could say, oh, there's that molecule. The question is it harmful?
yes. Are we getting heart attacks from it?
Not
Are we
just
getting
does it exist,
disease?
does
Yeah.
it hurt? How do you know it hurts? And I was really struck. I've I can't say that I've thoroughly looked for the published literature on the effects of oxidized seed oils on human health. But I've looked at fish oils. Now, fish oils are much more susceptible to oxidation than are seed oils. because in
Yes.
fish oils, you have these two, the EPA and DHA, which are the primary omega-3s of interest. And they have, instead of like linoleic acid has two double bonds, every time you have a double bond in a molecule, it's a place where oxygen can attack and produce an oxidized product. So linoleic, omega-6 has two spots. EPA and DHA have 5 or 6 spots, hot spots, where oxygen can attack. So the fatty acids in omega-3 or fish oils are much more readily oxidized, no question. But they're in producing fish oils, we'll go down this rabbit trail a little bit. Producing fish oils, the manufacturers always keep oxygen completely out of the process. They use nitrogen, which replaces oxygen, and nitrogen doesn't react with these fatty acids. So they keep oxygen away. And once you put fish oil in a capsule, one of these gel caps, they're completely impervious to oxygen. So you're not getting oxidized fish oils to any significant extent. But the reason I'm talking about this is I did read a study out of Norway some years ago that really surprised me. It tested the idea that oxidized oils are bad for you. Are they or not? So what the researchers did is they took a vat of fish oil, and they bubbled on the desktop, bubbled oxygen through it, which is something you never would do. I mean, that's egregious. You never do something like that. But they wanted to produce a really crappy oxidized fish oil. Then they took that fish oil and put it in capsules.
Well, that's
And
not
then
really great research. I mean, nobody does that. So
nobody does that, but they put it in capsules, and then they took the fish oil before it was oxidized, the clean stuff,
yeah.
put that in capsules, and then they did a randomized human study giving people either the oxidized fish oils or the regular fish oils.
Ooh, I wouldn't want to be the one to receive the oxidized one, right?
Well,
Unless,
that's the way you test it. That's the way you do science, is you
yeah.
do experiments.
What
And
happened?
then after about, I think, 8 weeks of taking one or the other, they looked at lots of measures of oxidized products in the blood and in the urine, and they couldn't find any difference.
Really?
Our bodies are incredible, incredible. There are so many systems we have in our bodies to protect ourselves against some of these types of products. We can just digest them away, not absorb them, whatever. It didn't make any difference. You looked at every inflammatory biomarker they looked at, couldn't find a difference. And so this is an extreme example
Yeah. Yeah.
of the idea that people throw around, that if you oxidize a vegetable oil, it's going to kill you. It's poison now. Well, show me the data. I mean, it's nice to have this sky blue idea that if it's got some oxidized products in it, it's going to be bad for you. Well, show me that it's true in a human, not in a rat.
Yeah. I think that's where some of the cases have come with the people who are demonizing the seed oils is perhaps the research aren't randomized controlled trials, or it's not on big subsets of people. Not to say that it doesn't mean anything. I don't know, because in theory, the arguments make sense, right? I mean, you would think about it, but here you say there's this one study. I don't know how big was that study in terms of the extreme oxidized.
Yeah, that kind of, when you do human studies, you don't use thousands of people when you're giving supplements. Might have been 30 or 40 people in each group. I can't remember, but it was the kind of size you usually would use in a small, especially when you're measuring lots of different things in the blood.
Yeah.
It just gets too expensive to do too many people.
Yeah.
So
well, what do you think then? If you think if they did use thousands of people, you'd have the same outcome?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, the important thing is not. We know several different blood-based markers of oxidation that we can measure, and we typically will measure in studies. What we don't know is the other things that we're not measuring.
Like
the other processes, the other systems, the other even friendly molecules that might be being made from a seed oil. If we don't know about them, we don't measure them. That doesn't mean they don't exist. It just means we're not measuring them. And if you don't measure them, you can't say anything about them, which is why I think it's just finding like CRP level, C-reactive protein, the kind of the classic inflammatory protein. You may have some situation where that protein goes up in the blood, pro-inflammatory. But there may be 50 other processes on the other side that you're not measuring, that you just don't know about, because we haven't discovered all of the pathways that happen in human cells that are counterbalancing that pro-inflammatory signal with anti-inflammatory signals. So at the end of the day, your body doesn't get hurt.
Mhm.
And without knowing the full picture, which is why I think it's important to look at actual clinical disease outcomes. Don't just look at blood biomarkers and assume that you now have a higher level of a risk for a disease. Look at the risk for the disease, which is where you have to kind of do the studies we're doing, which is more what we call epidemiology, which is following large groups of people over time and looking at blood levels of omega-3 or omega-6 fatty acids and seeing, well, do the people who have the highest blood levels of omega-6, for example, linoleic acid, do they, if you follow them out for 10, 20 years, are they more likely to have heart attacks? Are they more likely to develop inflammatory bowel disease or lung inflammation or something like that? Look at the disease outcomes. That's the question you need to ask. Don't worry about just looking at a certain molecule floating around in the blood. That might be you might draw inferences and assume that you've got higher risk for disease without actually measuring the risk for disease.
I think it's an absolutely crucial point to make. And I remember when I was first told that I had high cholesterol, my number was high. I was like, well, wait a second. And the doctor looked at me and said, well, technically I'm supposed to give you a statin, but knowing you and your healthy diet and lifestyle. And I said, well, look, I'm concerned about a heart attack. I don't care about a number. Like, what are the chances of me having some heart disease? And that's the real problem. And if we're just looking at, oh, high cholesterol, let's just get it down. And there are some studies showing that the people with the lowest cholesterol levels may also have heart attacks. Well, that doesn't really help me to try to get it down.
Yeah.
I want to lower the risk of a heart attack or stroke or whatever. So I think that's a really crucial point that you make and that we don't seem to ask. And maybe, yes, there's, like you said, you can make a molecule inflammatory, put it into a petri dish, have people eat it, and then have no outcome. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
but that's the kind of evidence. The folks on the anti-processed seed oil need to show that it is using those oils chronically in a controlled study actually produces bad health outcomes. And it's very hard to do. I mean, these are very difficult studies and expensive studies. What you really would love is a random placebo-controlled randomized study where half the people are given a oxidized processed soybean oil. The other half are not given or given a unprocessed or less minimally processed seed oil. And that's the only difference between the two groups. Now that's complicated to do because most people don't get their seed oils from the bottle. It comes as part of fried foods. Well, maybe fried foods are bad for other reasons.
Yes. Guilty by association.
Guilt by association, the company you keep. It may be certainly possible that people eat a lot of fried foods aren't healthy. Is that because of the oil? Or is that because of the calories? Or is that because of something else in the fried food that is causing a problem? Don't blame seed oils if the problem is the fact that you're eating chicken nuggets for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, something like that. You can't assume it's one component that's causing the problem. Even those studies are very hard to do, especially for 5, 6 years. They count heart attacks in both groups, that kind of thing. And you probably have to have 10 or 20,000 people in each group, which is kind of the standard size of a big randomized trial with a drug. It's much harder to do, especially to have people maintain that diet for that much time. So we're dealing with a question that can't really be in practice because it's too expensive. In practice, we can never do the study we really want to do to prove it. So you have to back off and say, well, okay, what do we have? And that's where we have the epidemiologic, the population studies where and there's two kinds. One is the kind that actually has recruits a group of people, healthy people in their 40s or 50s or something like that. And you'd recruit 10,000 people. And then you do very detailed dietary intake questionnaires, for example.
But are those accurate? I mean, I always hear that they're very inaccurate and people.
Well, they're not very inaccurate. They're not perfect. Yeah. It's very hard to get a good look. I mean, if you think about some of the things we eat and the complex mixtures of foods that we eat and try to decipher out exactly how much of any given nutrient is in that thing you just ate or ate only half of, even though you said you ate the whole thing. Yeah, I mean, there are problems with food questionnaires, no question, but that doesn't mean they're useless.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I know there was certainly one good study that looked at the reported intake of linoleic acid in thousands of people using food frequency questionnaires. And they found that the higher the reported intake of linoleic acid, the lower the risk for heart disease.
Say that again.
The higher the intake
The higher the intake of
of
linoleic acid,
linoleic acid, the omega 6
six.
in seed oils, the higher the intake, the lower the risk over 10 or 20 years of heart disease.
That's insane. Especially, but again, I'm a little confused. I'm understanding. So I mentioned the omega 6. We're talking a lot about linoleic acid. What other, if I think the people who are demonizing this are not so keen on talking about linoleic. They seem to be okay with that. What is the other, is it just a different molecule that they're arguing about? Or is it just that oxidation?
I think it's just that idea of oxidation. It's
Okay.
not that there's another, like in seed oils or in vegetable oils, there isn't another omega 6. That's it. I
Yeah.
mean, linoleic is it. And there are some people who are all twisted around about linoleic acid. There is that component of it, but there are other people who are worried more about the processing side of things. So there's two groups, or they overlap, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Um,
So go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah. So the so we were talking about a big study where they looked at dietary intake
Mhm.
of linoleic acid and found that higher intakes were associated with. Now, it doesn't prove that they caused it because you can never, if you don't randomize people to different groups, you can't make firm conclusions of one thing caused another.
Yeah.
But you find associations, and associations can be good, they can be bad. I mean, you can, there's some really silly associations that people will trot out when they want to dismiss any study that's an association study. But that's a silly way to do it. We've taken the next step, which is better than asking people how much of A, B, and C foods they eat. And we just looked at the levels of linoleic acid in the blood of people,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
that is objective. That measures what they're eating, even if they don't know what they're eating.
That makes sense. So whether their linoleic acid is coming from a processed hamburger or fried chicken, or is it coming from them putting some sunflower oil on their dressing, right?
Right.
It
It,
doesn't
it
really
doesn't
matter.
it
And that
doesn't matter.
maybe that's important because you can have that healthy user bias where you can say, well, maybe people are getting good outcomes because they're eating salad, and maybe that linoleic acid or that sunflower is as damaging. But then how do you weed out the people who you would think if they're eating unhealthy diet and there's a lot of seed oils in there anyways because they come with the processed foods, how do you know if it's coming from the linoleic acid which or not?
Yeah, it's very hard to know where the linoleic acid comes from in your blood.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
kind of diet. It's going to be a mix. Everybody's a mixture of some of this, some of that. Nobody's just getting all their linoleic acid from hamburgers. Well, hamburgers haven't got much. French fries. Okay.
French fries, yeah.
Great. Okay. Somebody else is getting all their linoleic acid from putting a vegetable oil on their green salad. And that's all they eat. I mean, those are extremes,
Yeah.
but most everybody is in the middle. They're getting it
Mhm.
from both places. Mayonnaise, other salad dressings have vegetable oils in them.
But they have a lot of other stuff in there that's not so
A
great
lot of
either
other
that we
stuff
don't
too.
know if it's
Very-
causing inflammation or not.
or not, right? But if you want to narrow the question down, is linoleic acid bad or good? I mean, that's not what food did it come from. Is linoleic acid bad or good? The hypothesis would be, from the adverse point of view, is that people who have the highest levels of linoleic acid, which may mean they eat more processed foods, right? They should, this is a good hypothesis, testable, they should have worse health outcomes than people that have low linoleic acid,
Yeah.
right?
That's
That's a reasonable, testable hypothesis. So when we test that hypothesis by looking at really thousands of people in multiple different studies around the world and pool it all together, and we look at the blood linoleic acid levels, which means whatever you think it means. It means you eat a healthy diet or you eat a crappy diet, depending on your perspective. Higher linoleic acid is strongly linked in a very dose dependent way, meaning if you look across quintiles, so 20% of people, you compare the people who have the lowest levels of linoleic acid, that's your reference group. Now, what kind of disease outcomes do they have over 20 years? Heart attacks, developed diabetes, strokes, whatever. That's your reference group. And then that's the lowest 20%. And then you divide the group into fifths, quintiles, then the next 20%, so 20 to 40%, 40 to 60%, 60 up to 80%, the people have the highest linoleic acid level. So you get a range of linoleic acid levels. And then you look within each of those groups, how many heart attacks do they have
Mm-hmm.
over time? And if linoleic acid is bad for you,
Mm-hmm.
you should find more heart attacks in the people that have the highest linoleic acid levels.
Yeah.
If it's good for you, you'll find the least number of heart attacks in the highest linoleic. And that is what we find. That's what the experiments show, that people who've got the highest linoleic acid have the lowest risk for heart attacks, the lowest risk for death from anything
Yeah.
over time, whether it's cancer, cardiovascular disease, or other causes. Higher linoleic acid is associated with lower risk for lots of bad outcomes. So, in the face of that, I challenge people who are saying linoleic acid is bad to explain to me how you explain this data to me. And they usually will ignore it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or they'll say, "Oh, it's just observational stuff. You can't believe any of that."
Yeah.
Well, no. You can't play that game. Address this question. Explain to me why people who have the highest linoleic acid levels in their blood have the healthiest outcomes. Why? You give me a reason. And then they go, "Well, I don't know. Well, the oxidized fatty acids are bad for you." They won't address it.
What do you think is the reason for that?
I think there are a lot of things that linoleic acid does in our body that we maybe don't understand yet. I mean, for one thing, we know that higher linoleic acid does lead to lower cholesterol levels, to your point.
Mm-hmm.
That's one little piece of it.
But is that important? The lower cholesterol levels. We now. Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean there's 50 years of work showing that higher cholesterol levels in general
Yeah.
are associated with increased risk for heart disease. And if you lower cholesterol levels with statins or with diet, you reduce your risk. Okay.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not going to get on the cholesterol is the joke bandwagon. I mean, there's something there.
Okay.
It's not the beginning and end of heart disease by any means. But that's one thing linoleic acid does. Its higher levels are linked with lower cholesterol, lower LDL cholesterol levels, linked with lower blood pressure. Okay, that's good. Maybe that's part of the mechanism. But there's probably 50 other things that linoleic acid as a molecule that's doing in the body to improve cellular health that we don't know how to measure. We don't even know what it is, which is why you look at clinical outcomes, disease outcomes. And if the studies that we do, we look at a range of linoleic acid levels in a population and then look at the diseases. If there was no relationship, the people who had the lowest linoleic acid levels and the highest linoleic had exactly the same risk for heart attacks, for example, would say, well, it's unrelated.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any difference. If the people who had the highest levels had more heart attacks than anybody else, you say, well, there's something wrong with it. It's bad. Whenever I have these discussions with people, I say, if the data had turned out the other way, if the observational studies where we look at linoleic acid in the blood and risk for heart attacks or strokes or cancer or whatever had gone the other way, showing higher levels of linoleic were bad, would you reject this study?
Yeah.
They would love it. They would sing its praises to the heavens.
Yeah.
Because it fits their worldview. When it goes against their worldview, they dismiss it.
Yeah.
And that's not scientific. That's that's philosophical.
So then how would you translate this into the real world? If we're having better outcomes health-wise with more linoleic acid, does that mean we should start eating more French fries and chicken nuggets or just use
Probably not.
sunflower oil in our salads? Like how are you use that?
Yeah. I would, first of all, not succumb to the idea that we need to be reducing our linoleic acid intake by avoiding seed oils in any form. We shouldn't be doing that. That's a bad thing. That simply says if you lower your linoleic acid intake by whatever means over time, you're actually, in fact, increasing your risk for heart disease and diabetes. If the inverse is true, higher levels are associated with lower risk, then lower levels are associated with what?
Yeah.
Higher risk. Yeah, it depends on what's relative. So I would say, number one, don't decide to use canola oil, which is low in omega-6, instead of like soybean oil, which is like 50% omega-6, because you're afraid of the omega-6s. Don't do that. That's a bad idea. use the higher linoleic oil whenever you can in your cooking. And it's hard to say what to do about French fries and chicken nuggets. Okay. Obviously, I'm not advocating eating those things. I would say don't eat those things anyway. Don't eat them much, once in a while. Okay. But emphasize getting, when you can, high omega-6 oils in your diet to keep your levels elevated. And don't get on the bandwagon of saying these are poison and we need to get rid of them, because that's counterproductive. It's kind of like the trans fat thing all over again,
Yeah.
in my view,
Yeah.
where in the 80s we thought trans fats were great because they replaced solid fats from animals in margarines and stuff. Then we found out, oops, they're bad.
Yeah. I can't
And
believe
now
it's not butter.
right, right, right. So that's really, we get linoleic acid in so many different processed foods. It's just, in fact, I think like chicken casserole type thing, chicken dishes is where like the number one source, the highest, it's not like 50%, but the highest individual type of food that provides linoleic acid comes from something like that. And then like salad dressings and mayonnaise and vegetable oils are like down in 3 and 4 and 5 ranking and where we get linoleic acid. So I'm not saying eat more of the fried foods, not by any means, but eat foods that don't be afraid of linoleic acid in soybean oil. I mean, sunflower and soy and safflower nowadays, which used to be very high in linoleic acid,
Mhm.
have been hybridized and bred to reduce their linoleic acid markedly. So they're now kind of like canola oil, being high monounsaturates, like with oleic acid.
Why?
So they're, to make them more stable,
Mhm.
shelf stable, because the more linoleic acid you have, the more chance of oxidation is. So the food, if you don't eat it fresh, may go bad over time because
Mhm.
it's oxidizable. And part of it was also trying to get rid of the trans fats in some of these oils, partially hydrogenated oils. The more linoleic acid you have, the more likely you're to produce a trans fat from the industrial process of partial hydrogenation. So I think that was part of it. But I used to think safflower and sunflower were very high. They used to be. They like
Yeah.
60, 70% linoleic acid. Now they're down 20, 25%, something like that.
So, do you think that the average American is getting enough linoleic acid or enough omega 6s in their diet?
Yeah, that's a good question. Do I think that we would do better if we had more? Yeah, because we're on a downward slope right now. And I would, first of all, want to stop the slide
Mhm.
and then bump it back up. Like American Heart Association, a bunch of groups who say somewhere between 5 and 10% of calories should be linoleic acid, omega
Mhm.
6. And I think that's reasonable. It is very hard to actually get higher than 10% of calories. You really got to go out of your way. But we're sitting around 6% of our calories now from linoleic acid. I think the evidence would say eating more would be better.
Mhm. So then, what do you think is the cause of the diseases that we're having in the U.S. With the metabolic diseases? We have heart disease and diabetes and Alzheimer's and everything that people point their finger to the inflammatory oils. What do you think then is the reason for
Well, I
some of
mean, I think the very biggest is too many calories and too little exercise.
that? Hmm.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's kind of obvious. I'm sure you're aware of how portion sizes have changed since the 1960s. Good
Yeah,
Lord.
I get scared when I go back to the US. I forget that I can't order a starter and a main.
No, no. I mean, if I go to a fast food place, I get a kids menu. I get a kids meal. 'Cause that's what it used to be.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
a skinny little hamburger and a little thing of French fries, and that's fine. But nowadays, you supersize the food, you supersize people, and the stuff is tasty, no question. It tastes great, and you're not going to be able to outlaw that. I don't know how the current Health and Human Services
Yeah.
Mr. Kennedy's actually going to change this. I think it's important to change. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to get kids to eat healthier and move more
Hmm.
with more and more video games out there, more and more reasons to look at a screen. But I think that is the biggest problem. It's not a processed vegetable oils. Sugar is a part of the problem, but sugar because of the calories that it
Hmm.
provides. Soft drinks with 35 and 40 grams of sugar per thing, and people just popping them down like crazy.
Yeah.
I don't blame the sugar. I blame the number of calories you're getting from these things, and then the fact that you're not moving.
Yeah.
That's it's boring, but I think that's
Yeah.
the problem.
Yeah, no, it's the same. I can't remember his name. There was a leader in the obesity clinic in Los Angeles, and he gave us a presentation in my gerontology class, and it was all about sugars, and everything was about sugar. And yeah, he kind of concluded the same. Like he didn't want to demonize sugar. It's the quantities that we're
It's
eating,
quantities,
and
right?
it's the real problem. And so, yeah, I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And sometimes we go down these rabbit holes and we miss the big picture of what's really happening. And then we have this fear food mongering going on. And very often, and I'm sure most of the listeners to our podcast are not the people who should be really concerned about. They're probably pretty healthy, or I mean, they've got most of the things in place. That's not the people who should be listening to this podcast
Yeah, right.
worried
Exactly.
about these things. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
then they get into this real pickle, and I feel bad because in fact, yeah, I just see that they're losing the whole picture. And I think it's the stress about, I can't go out to eat, I don't know what the restaurant is using, and I cannot travel, God forbid. And then you think, wow, you're missing out on so many of the things in life. And I think, I don't know, I mean, that's why we're having you here. But there is no doubt that I speak to some people who say, oh, no, when I eat those oils, I feel it. I don't, they like, I feel the inflammation. I don't know where this is coming from. Is it the oil, or is it the something else?
Or is it the prior conception that these are bad for me, therefore when I eat them, I have to feel bad? Is a suggestion.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know what they're talking about exactly, what feeling bad means.
Mhm.
You really can't feel chronic inflammation. I mean, not in your joints, you certainly can,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
just this thing that people talk about, kind of a higher level of tone of inflammation, that doesn't feel like anything.
Hmm.
You're tired. What is that about? Well, is check the calories and the amount of food and how much exercise you're getting. You need to major in the majors.
Yeah. So let's go back to the oxidation, the heating, the smoke point, for example. A lot of people say,
Hmm.
oh, you don't cook your oils to the smoke point. So, the people who hate seed oils, then of course they don't buy them at all. But then sometimes they'll say, well, any oils, you don't want to get to a smoke point. Is there a real trouble with that? Is that causing inflammation? We have to be careful, the smoke point?
Yeah, I think number one, it's taste probably as well, because you change the flavor of whatever you're cooking once you heated the oil past its point where it starts smoking. And I don't think I'm not aware of anybody who's actually done an experiment to show that you heat an oil to some degree below its smoke point and cook something in it, and then you cook the same food in it above higher temperature, you actually get some different outcome.
Mhm.
That's what you'd have to do if you want to say it's going above the smoke point. That it causes a problem. Otherwise, it's just these hidden assumptions that people have
Yeah.
that it must be bad.
Mhm.
Well, maybe,
Yeah.
but yeah, you just can't. I guess people don't think scientifically. I guess you can't fault them for that. But to just assume that an oil going above its smoke point is now producing something that's toxic to you is a huge leap in assumptions. We don't know that.
There's no research on that?
I can't say there's no research on that. I don't know. I mean, there's probably been research in rats,
Mm. Interesting.
and sometimes what I don't like about animal research is they typically give an animal a lot more of whatever it is they're testing than a human could ever eat.
Why would they do that?
Just to show an effect, get a publication, and get a grant.
Oh, geez. What happened to
I mean,
science? What's going on? Like,
I know, and I'm throwing a very broad brush here, because I haven't. My most of my research has been in the omega-3 field, not in the seed oils field.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I'm a little bit of an outsider on that, and I'm more comfortable in the linoleic acid side of the question than I am on the oxidation products you produce from heating, because
yeah.
I haven't studied that. But
Well,
I mean, it makes some sense to avoid those things. It makes sense to avoid fried foods.
yeah.
But
Yeah,
do
we
people
seem
do
to
it?
have lost all our common sense sometimes. And
Yeah, well, I know. And too much social media is not good for you.
well, yeah, I mean there's clickbait and there's hooks and we want likes and follows and I know that game. And
No.
unfortunately it's like that and I probably will never be huge because I don't like to demonize things or stick my flag in the ground. And there's just so much nuance. And
Yes, there is. Right.
unfortunately, we want to consume information very quick, very rapidly. Even when I make reels and I tried my best to do something in 30 seconds, it's really, really hard. Yeah,
No, I know.
honestly.
I know. I know.
So
Well,
since you are actually you're really comfortable with the omega 3s, right? And you have done plenty of podcasts as well talking about omega 3s. And maybe bring a little bit of that research into the picture as well. So what is the research showing in terms of omega 3s and the benefits or any drawbacks?
yeah. Well, we've done well, most recently. We've been doing, of course, the omega-3 story goes back to the 1970s with the discovery of in the Greenland Inuits of the high levels of these omega-3s in their blood and the really presumed reduced risk for heart attacks. And in the context of the 1970s, where a high fat, high cholesterol diet like was being eaten by Inuits would be absolutely terrible. We thought low fat was what you needed, low cholesterol, and these guys are eating high fat, high cholesterol, and they weren't having heart attacks, and that was the conundrum. And then the Danish investigators found the omega-3s in the blood and in the food of these people, and then they studied what do the omega-3s do, and we found, oh, they're really protective. They prevent the blood from clotting inappropriately, which is a good thing. It's kind of like taking an aspirin. It makes your blood thinner, so less likely to clot, and that's a good thing. And they lowered blood triglyceride levels, and that's a good thing. And it turned out they do a lot of things just to make your arteries healthier, less stiff, so your blood flows more smoothly, and your cells start to work better when you have more omega-3 in the membranes, which is where the omega-3s hang out. We know that the cell functions more healthily. Omega-3s are oils, and I like to kind of think of a cell like it has doors that go in and it has doors that go out. It's a swinging door that'll go in, a swinging door that goes out. So you need to bring in on through these doors good things that the cell needs, nutrients, things like that. And you need to get rid of the garbage. You need to get rid of the trash, and that's the swinging door that goes out.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, the omega-3s kind of lubricate the hinges on those doors. I mean,
Yeah.
very simple-minded way of thinking about it, but that's kind of what they do to a membrane. And that has implications across all of our cells. It makes them more healthy. So we've looked at the kind of study I described earlier for looking at blood omega-6 levels and heart, cancer, death outcomes. We've done the same things with omega-3. And we found the same things that they do the omega-6, linoleic acid, and the EPA, DHA, the long chain omega-3s. Higher levels of both of those are good. They're associated with better health outcomes. So high omega-6 and high omega-3, which is another reason why this ratio doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Because you really want elevated levels of both the omega-3s from fish and linoleic acid. So they're kind of partners in prevention, we like to say. And that's a problem with ratio thinking, that because if you get into this omega-6 omega-3 ratio mindset and you think the omega-6s are bad, that's a problem, because if you lower your omega-6s, you're going to increase your risk for major diseases.
Yeah.
I don't care if people want to improve their ratio by taking more omega-3. That's great. I mean, do that. Just don't lower your omega-6.
Yeah. So funny.
That's the wrong way to fix a ratio. But the other problem with ratios is you can have a high level of omega-3 and a high level of omega-6 and have a given ratio. And you can have a low level of omega-6 and a low level of omega-3 and have exactly the same ratio.
Yeah. And but you're at risk by having these low levels of
right. In one case, with the same ratio, you can have a very high risk or very low risk with the same ratio.
Yeah.
So it's confusing and doesn't make any sense. But people love a white hat and a black hat, a good guy and a bad guy. And so this has a sticking power, unfortunately. And for years, we've been trying to get rid of it.
We like black, white, good, bad, make it simple. And unfortunately, life is not like that.
It's not simple.
Yeah, it's not. And it's not simple. There is so much nuance. And that's why I like this biohacking space that we're in, because I'm like, well, just test, measure, and assess. Like, test it out. Like, I don't care what 15,000 people did. If it doesn't work on you, it doesn't matter. Like, you're the only person that matters in the room. So let's deal with you.
Good point.
Yeah. So then I want to go into the omega-3. So I think generally most people say great to get your omega-3s from food, from real food, right?
Real
And
food.
that would be fish and seafood and things like that. But the people who don't like seafood or cannot, for whatever reason, they take a supplement. So what happens? We talked about we don't have to worry about the oxidation. Some people say, "Oh, well, what about the oxidation during the transport?" I guess that wouldn't even matter,
Don't
right?
worry about it. No, right, right. It's not a problem. It is not a problem.
So can is it can we buy just any kind of a simple omega supplement? What would you recommend in that department?
For omega-3 supplements, my kind of standard recommendation is number one to get both EPA and DHA.
Any certain
And
amounts?
the amounts it's per capsule. Typically, the capsule is 1 gram,
Hmm.
1,000 milligrams. That's what they'll say. The thing is, you can have very different amounts of omega-3 in that 1 gram capsule. The cheapest products have the least amount of omega-3 in that capsule.
Hmm.
And they are probably, you might get a burp. They might be processed not as cleanly, not that it's damaging to you. It's just that you might get a burp. Some people get this burp back and some people don't.
Hmm.
If you take your omega-3s with meals, typically that reduces the amount of burping of the fish. But the more concentrated, back to the pill, 1,000 milligrams, if you can get 500, 600, 700, or 50, 60, 70% of that pill being EPA and DHA, and I don't care much about the ratio between EPA and DHA, roughly 50-50, 60-40, 40-60, that's
Hmm.
great. That's what they should, they always come together in fish.
Yeah.
Both,
Yeah.
you need both of
Yeah.
them. So they're always there. So I aim for higher concentrated products. I aim for a triglyceride based product instead of an ethyl ester.
Hmm.
If the ethyl esters are just not as well absorbed,
Hmm.
particularly on an empty stomach.
Yeah.
Um, and the triglyceride forms are more natural. And now many, the natural, if you're using a natural fish oil that hasn't been processed very much, it's about 30% EPA and DHA in a
Hmm.
triglyceride form.
Hmm.
That's roughly what it comes from. Sardines, herrings, that's the original source of fish oils. And if you want to get higher concentrates, the manufacturer has to go through some processes to get rid of some of the other non-omega-3 fatty acids to increase the concentration of the omega-3s in the capsule.
Hmm.
So they're more expensive
Hmm.
because that, but they're more efficient. You don't have to take 3 or 4 capsules a day. You can take one, maybe 2 capsules a day. So it's
It's
easier.
easier. What about there are three things that ingredients that are interesting for heart health that I've been learning about. One is the krill oil, if that's
Mhm.
superior. The other one is pro-resolving mediators. You can explain what that is. And the third one is a fatty 15, an omega 15 that I'd like to attack. What these all are, the differences, and if
Yeah.
we should be taking them or not.
Good. Yeah, krill oil is kind of a fish oil. Sort of krill is near the bottom of the food chain in a sense, and that's where fish get their omega-3s is by eating it. They don't make it any more than we do. The omega-3s are actually originally synthesized in single-celled organisms, microalgae, it's called, in the ocean. And
Hmm.
that's what the krill will eat. And then bigger fish eat the krill, how that works.
So is it
Krill
better
oil is,
to get that?
let's say again.
Sorry. So krill oil. So then the logic would be if that's where the fish are getting their oil from, then maybe it'd be higher concentrated, and that's why some people say go get the omegas with the krill oil.
Yeah, they usually say go get the omegas with krill oil because the krill oil, the omega-3s are in a phospholipid form as opposed to a triglyceride, primarily
Ah,
phospholipid,
okay.
and which is a slightly different. I mean, when you eat salmon, you're getting omega-3s in a phospholipid form and a triglyceride form. The phospholipid is what's in the membranes, and the triglyceride is kind of what's the fat that's stored between cells. So phospholipid form is good for absorption. Krill oil is a fine product. You usually find it's not as concentrated in omega-3 per capsule. But how important is that? Most studies have shown it's about as effective, maybe slightly more effective per gram of omega-3 in raising the omega-3 index, which is the blood omega-3 level that we measure.
Hmm.
So krill oil is fine. It's typically a little more expensive because it's harder to get, harder to manufacture, so to speak, purify.
Hmm.
So that's krill oil. Yeah, I'm in favor of krill oil. I like krill oil. The other one was SPMs or
Yes.
specialized pro-resolving mediators.
Yes.
Yeah,
Probably
that's it.
explain what that is too, because not a lot of people know
Well,
what those are.
yeah. some of it gets back to some discoveries by a guy named Charlie Sirhan over the last 20 years that the process of inflammation, which we all kind of understand, you get a cut, your body creates an inflammatory thing which brings white blood cells to heal the wound, and you get red and heat because your cells are the tissue is swelling up to prevent the cut from going any further, block it. Those are all good inflammatory reactions. Heat, pain, swelling, those things are normal. And the old idea was that, well, just in time when you're done doing that, it just naturally goes away. Well, what Dr. Sirhan and colleagues have shown is it doesn't just naturally go away. It's actually there's a inflammation resolving system in the body that forces the inflammation to go down. It doesn't just drift down for lack of use. It actually is actively driven down. That's the resolving of inflammation.
That makes sense.
Well, it does make some sense. I
Now
mean,
I understand the
pretty
bottle.
cool.
Yeah.
So, and the molecules that drive this resolution, the pro-resolving, are mostly derived from the omega-3s series. They're versions of omega-3. If you take EPA and DHA, and your body will make some additional, they'll add some other chemicals to it and make another molecule that's very active. They're pro-resolving mediators. And so they got the name specialized pro-resolving mediators, SPM. I'm not sure why anybody ever called them specialized. I mean, there's not a cell or molecule in your body that isn't specialized. So it's kind of irrelevant term. I like to just call pro-resolving mediators, PRMs. But there are some companies selling products that says SPMs. So what they really are fish oils, 99% fish oil with a certain, maybe not 99, 95% fish oil, and maybe 5% of some not actual SPMs in the pill. If you start with an omega-3 and you go step A, step B, step C to produce a pro-resolving mediator, the fish oil would be A. What these pills have in is molecule B, which then can be converted to C and D. So it's a little bit down that pathway, but you're not actually eating or taking in pro-resolving mediators in those pills. These are the precursors to those molecules.
Yes.
And nobody, I mean, to me, anybody has yet to show me that when you take some of these SPMs, which are much more expensive products, you actually get a different blood level of SPMs than if you took the same omega-3 product without them. Your body will make these SPMs as needed, and you don't have to
Eating
give the
fish
precursor.
or having the omega-3 supplement.
Having the omega-3 supplement without them, your body will take EPA and DHA, and where necessary, it will make these SPMs. So what's not been shown is that you actually get higher tissue or blood levels when you take a capsule that says it has SPMs in it versus a fish oil capsule with the same amount of omega-3
There's no
that doesn't
research
have
on that.
SPMs in it.
There's no research on that, or are you saying the research is not showing the?
No, there's none published that I know of. I've heard of one study where they actually did that experiment, looked to see how tissue levels are affected by taking fish oil versus fish oil plus SPMs, and they didn't find any difference in the blood levels of the SPMs.
Yes.
Which makes some sense because they're present in the capsule at very, very low levels.
Yeah.
I mean, it's enough to write it on the label,
Yeah.
but it's down instead of milligrams, it's down in the microgram level.
Yeah.
So they're there, but they're not. So I don't think that's ready for prime time.
Yeah, I would still like to study not only just looking at those two factors that you mentioned, but then the health outcomes. Like, okay, what does it mean as having more
right.
SPMs in my body? Like, I don't care. I want to know if my arteries are getting clogged or not,
Right.
or less because I took the SPMs or things like that.
Yeah, and that's a study that needs to be done. And unfortunately, there's not going to be done probably by the company that sells it, because if it doesn't work out,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, even if they did do it, they wouldn't publish it, I guess, right? Or
that's the
it'd get
problem.
lost somewhere
Right.
or
You would get
manipulated.
buried. You get buried. The last thing you asked about was this C15O, the fatty
Yes.
15.
Yeah.
This is a fatty acid that's a component of dairy products because it really comes from milk. It's made in the udder of the cow. And it's what's called an odd chain fatty acid. It's 15 carbons long. Most natural, quote, fatty acids in the blood are even numbered. There's 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. Yeah, because they're synthesized 2 carbons at a time.
Yeah,
And
I
so
got it. Yeah.
they're mostly, but in the udder in a cow, the cow has got a tremendous amount of bacteria in one of its stomachs that's metabolizing fats, and they produce a 3 carbon fatty acid called propionic acid. That if you take that 3 carbon and start adding twos to it, you get odd chain fatty acids,
Hmm.
primarily C15 and C17. When I say C, I mean carbon, 15 carbons, 17 carbons, and they have no double bonds, so they're saturated with hydrogen. So we call them C15O, zero, because there's no double bonds. C17, zero, no double bonds. And this, like C15, has been measured in the blood. We've done studies with it. It's very, very low in the blood. Again, it's a marker of dairy intake. If you want to know how much, cheese, milk, full fat dairy, if you want to know how much somebody's eating, you can kind of measure the C15 level in their blood, and you can get a sense of how much dairy is part of their diet.
Mm.
And we've seen that higher levels of C15, higher levels of dairy intake are associated with lower risk for diabetes. That's great. I think the C15 is again a marker of dairy intake, and there's a ton of different nutrients in dairy and other molecules. What this new company who's promoting this, it's called Fatty 15, promoting it as a new essential fatty acid, I think is way ahead of the science. I think they're leaping to conclusions saying it's an essential fatty acid when the evidence that I've read, that's published evidence, says it may be a active fatty acid. It may do something, kind of like omega-3, EPA and DHA. They do something, but they're not essential in the diet.
Mm.
Alpha linolenic, ALA, is essential in the diet. But EPA and DHA are not essential in the classic nutritional sense that if you don't eat it, you die.
Yeah.
They're not like that. But the omega-3s provide a lot of health benefits. So that's kind of where I think the C15 is trying to be. They think they can show that there are some health benefits, although they've not done it in humans. They've not
Oh,
shown this in humans.
okay.
They've shown it in cell culture studies, some rats or mouse studies where they extrapolate a change in a mouse or a rat and apply it to humans.
Yeah.
I think they've just gone way too far, too fast. The evidence is not there that it's an essential fatty acid. The evidence is not there that it's a longevity factor, which is, I think, is what they're promoting now. It, there simply isn't the evidence to show that. It's assumption upon assumption upon assumption upon extrapolation,
Mm-hmm.
and they can make a nice case. And there's a new book out that for the undiscriminating non-scientific reader, you can connect A to B to C to D and make a great story. But if you look carefully at the evidence, I don't think it's there.
Well, maybe it'll change, do you think? Or is that
Maybe,
it's
maybe.
it's kind of it sounds
Well,
like a we don't know yet. Maybe, maybe not. It's too
we
early to
don't know
say.
yet. We know that we've done quite well. If you can get the amount of C15 that's in one of their capsules, like 200 milligrams, you can get that, I think, with like 2 or 3 pats of butter, something like that.
2 or 3 packs of butter.
Pat.
Pat. Oh, pats. I was like packs. Oh, it's a lot.
That's a lot. Not two or
Pats.
three servings of
Oh,
butter.
yeah.
It's about
Couple.
so you can get plenty of C15. And if you eat full fat yogurt or full fat milk, now what they would say is, well, the saturated fat that comes along with full fat dairy
Yeah.
is bad for you.
Yeah. Oh,
The
that's
norm.
another thing we have to talk about. The good, bad with the saturated. Sorry to interrupt you, but I just don't want to
No,
forget.
no, no, no. I mean, that's so anyway, I would say the C15 is not ready for prime time.
Mm, to be, yeah, we'll wait on that. There's other things. Well, just have 3 pats of butter if you can do dairy and saturated fat, right?
Right, right, and that's fine. And I think there probably is something to a higher dairy fat intake that may be helpful, but I
Mhm.
don't think anybody has shown that the actual molecule that's causing that benefit is C15.
Mm,
It,
super interesting. Super interesting. Okay, last question. I'm going to let you go if you can. If you can, I don't know. You stop me when you.
No, no, we're doing fine. Something about different saturated
The
fats?
saturated fat, and then I want to tackle the mercury thing with the
Oh,
fish. So
okay.
so let's start with the saturated fat and how bad is that? Because it's good, it's bad. People, especially in my space, in the biohacking space, we would all people are talking about tallow and let's eat real butter and let's let go of the seed oils, for example. So is there room in how damaging is the saturated fat to humans?
Yeah,
Or how beneficial? Sorry, I could train that
yeah,
differently.
yeah, yeah. Right. I think it's a tough question. There's so much evidence you can point to on kind of either side in a way. There's no question that eating the kind of saturated fat that's in dairy or in meat, primarily it's called palmitic acid, 16O, will raise your blood cholesterol, will raise your LDL cholesterol level, no doubt. And there are studies that show higher intakes of palmitic acid associated with increased risk for disease, heart disease particularly. But then there's studies that kind of question that. They say, well, maybe and there are other saturated fats. There's an 18O that's also in called stearic acid, which you think about steers. Stearic acid is also in meat, and it does not raise your cholesterol.
Mhm.
So it has a different effect than a 16 carbon. An 18 carbon versus a 16 carbon have different effects on your cholesterol and probably different effects on your health. So to say all saturated fats are bad is a little extreme. It
Mhm.
doesn't take into account some nuance.
I would
Eh,
imagine like coconut oil, for example, could be very different than an animal, I don't know, butter or steak. You would think
Yeah,
structurally they may be totally different. Not say one is better than the other, but just that seems to me the case. And that makes sense that maybe
yeah,
some is good, some is bad, or on
yeah,
effect on your health. And then again,
yeah.
we're all bio individuals, so we all react differently
I
too.
know, I know, I know. And honestly, I've not stuck my head deeply into the saturated fat controversy at the moment. I hear about it over there. It's crazy. We get in nutrition and then we get specialized in fats and we get subspecialized in omega-3 fats, and you kind of forget about all the rest of nutrition. And it's just the way it goes, I guess. I need to talk to some other people who are more into the saturated fat
Yeah.
question.
Well, I always tell people just do your own experiment. You figure it out on your own, and that's you'll know
Yeah,
you'll understand. Just eat the saturated fat, see what happens to your blood levels, and then take it out and see what happens, and then maybe you'll
yeah,
just figure that
yeah.
out. It's kind
Right.
of hard to say. Well, then, since you are so involved with the omega threes and fish oils, how concerned should we be about high levels of mercury?
Not nearly as concerned as we are.
There's another
The,
one out there. Another
no,
like
I mean,
you're
people are just absolutely terrified of mercury because of the FDA and well, and other agencies, and it all came out of such silly studies. The concern about, and it's all about pregnancy, childbirth, kids. That's primarily where the whole mercury problem arose. That there were high levels of mercury, and in one, it's called the Faroe Islands, not the leader of Egypt, but
yeah.
Faroe Islands are kind of north of Scotland. And there was a study done there where the kids had, I think, some developmental delays and high mercury levels because they were eating primarily a pilot whale.
Oh,
Whale is what
oh,
they're the fat from pilot whales or meat, not from fish,
yeah.
from pilot whales, which is a mammal. And that started a whole cascade of omega or mercury is bad for you. And so we have to identify. And back in 25 years ago, the FDA put out these warnings about there's four fish you got to avoid if you're pregnant or lactating: tilefish, king mackerel, shark, and I think it was
Swordfish
swordfish. Thank you. Right.
and tuna,
Like
tuna as
nobody
well.
eats these. Well,
No?
albacore tuna, the white tuna was kind of in the yellow zone, but
Mm.
those other four were in the
Oh,
red
okay.
zone. But like, who eats those things?
Yeah.
But the message that came across to pregnant women was don't eat any fish.
Yeah.
And that's what there was actually evidence seen after the FDA warnings came out. They looked at how much fish pregnant women were eating, and it dropped considerably. And that's terrible. I mean, that is exactly the wrong message. So we did a study. I didn't lead it. Joe Hibbelin was the lead author about 2 years ago, reviewing all the literature that looked at fish intake during pregnancy, regardless of mercury intake. Just look fish intake, high to low, and the outcomes, intellectual outcomes of the kids. And we found that the more fish you eat, the more fish women ate during pregnancy, the higher the IQ of the kid.
Wow.
Regard even if mercury was, sometimes mercury is a marker of fish intake.
Yes.
And so higher, and nobody's getting mercury levels like the toxic spill in Japan. That's so far out of line. We really think pregnant women and lactating women need to be eating as really as much fish. They can avoid those four. That's easy to do.
Hmm.
Very easy to. Salmon is great. A lot of small fish, they're great. They have no mercury at all. But the risk balance between avoiding the omega 3s, which are needed for your baby's brain to develop, because you're scared to death of a microgram of mercury, is completely out of balance.
Yeah.
That the mercury is not causing the problems. If anything, it's the lack of omega 3 that might be causing a problem. So we this paper I think was a really good example of pregnant women and lactating women should be encouraged to eat maybe up to 12 ounces of fish. I can't remember the recommendation, but just don't put any upper limit on it. People, there will be a natural limit. People just won't eat that much.
Hmm.
There's no need to limit fish intake. You can leave out those four. Okay, that's fine. But even that, the fear, people are far more afraid of putting the bad thing in their mouth than wanting to have good things put in.
Yeah,
There's just,
exactly. And sometimes we're reaching the wrong populations. People who are really concerned about it are the ones who probably don't need to worry too much. But then
no.
are you concerned about any, if somebody does have tested their mercury levels, they're very high, they should be lowering their fish intake or not?
Yeah, I guess very high
Mhm.
is the question,
Yeah.
and who's defining high,
Yeah.
and on what based on what disease outcome are we talking about high, or are we just saying in rat studies this level was bad, let's multiply it by 100 and we'll say that's the safe level for
Yeah.
humans. Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. How do you know that's harmful? Well, we want to put a cushion of safety in there, and we want to because they can't do the human studies. So, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden that level that they defined in a rat becomes high, and you get scared
Yeah.
without any evidence that that's the
Mhm.
problem. I don't advocate people just eating high mercury fish all the time. Not by any means. There's no need to do that. There's plenty of fish that don't have any mercury in them. Do mix and match, but just don't be scared of eating fish because you're worried about mercury because there's so little evidence that it really is damaging.
Yeah. Whenever we do these extremes, it's a trade-off, one for
Yeah,
the other, and you may
no
be making
kidding.
a worse trade-off for your own health. So
Right.
I'm gonna have to wrap this up. Gosh, I still have so many more questions. You're so intriguing, and
Well,
I just have one more
yeah,
question.
sure.
Maybe two. So just you're someone who's in the top 2% of scientists worldwide, right? And this is based on the impact of your research that you've done. So which oil or food do you think is the best to improve our cardiovascular health?
Well, fish oil.
Yes, I thought
I
that you would
mean,
say that.
let's. Yeah, I mean, duh. That's the one we're most lacking.
Okay.
So getting your EPA and DHA intake up to maybe 1,000 milligrams a day would
Yeah.
be fantastic for heart health.
Is there a way we should test or how the outcome is of whatever the food or the oil we're taking or capsule
Yeah,
or
I
fish oil
mean,
we're taking?
yeah, we developed, golly, 20 years ago now. We developed a blood test called the omega 3 index,
Oh,
and
great. How do we get
and
that? I mean, where can we find it?
you go well. You go to then like we have formed a laboratory about 12 or 13 years ago called Omega Quant,
Oh, yes. Yes, that's right. I did see that.
omegaquant.com,
Yeah.
and one can order the blood test. It's a finger stick. Prick your finger, drop on blood, put a drop of blood, mail it to the lab. We have a lab in Scotland, so we have people certainly in the UK and EU are able to use that lab.
Oh, cool.
In the US, we have, of course, our own lab here in South Dakota. But omegaquant.com, you order the basic omega 3 index test, and it's something like $55, I think. And it
Oh,
will
that's
tell you
interesting.
what your omega 3 index is. And we think it ought to be over 8%. We express the omega 3 index as a percent,
Hmm.
and it's the percent of the fatty acids in your red blood cell membrane that are EPA and DHA.
That's amazing. So, okay, I'm definitely going to go get this test. So this is great because I have the supplements and I have the fish and I can do my own little experiment and then test. And if I'm not at that 8, I can make some changes and then test again. I mean,
That's
that's
basics. It's 101.
yeah, yeah. N of 1 experiment too is the one that counts.
Yes.
So
Right,
I
right.
love that. Love it. Okay. So then in your own kitchen, what do you have in terms of oils and what do you cook with?
Well, I don't cook. Okay. I mean, my wife cooks.
Okay, what does she cook with?
Well, yeah, what does she cook? Right. Yeah. I mean, we'll use soybean oil, which is kind of what's typically bottled as vegetable oil. If you look on the label, it's going to be soybean oil. That's by like 70 or some percent of the seed oil that's consumed in America is soybean oil.
Mhm.
And that's fine. It's got good omega-6 levels in it, and we'll use that for making cooking anything that we need to have an oil in. I We also have olive oil. Use that sometimes. Frankly, I like butter, so I eat butter, and so I'm not worried about staying away from that. I get To me, if you get your omega-3 levels up high enough, I don't worry about I
Like
don't worry about
protective,
butter. Yeah,
more or
yeah. Once
less.
you're in a protective zone, and over 8%, 8 to 12%, as we think is the target. Most Americans are around 5 or 6%.
And
Um,
you? What are you?
I'm 10,
Awesome.
10%.
Cool. Do you ever try to like say, "Ooh, how can I get it like even higher?" Or you just
Well, we
you're
don't
happy
really
where
know
you're
that
at?
higher. We don't even know that higher is better. I mean, there's a point
Yeah.
when it's got to be where you're high enough. You can't Going higher doesn't give you any additional benefit. And nobody's done research up in that area because there's so few people
Yeah.
in the world. I mean, the Japanese are kind of a good example of a population that has a one of the highest omega-3 index levels, twice as high as Americans.
Yeah.
And interestingly, despite the fact that they have more hypertension and they smoke a lot more, they also live 4.5 years longer than Americans do on average.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I can't attribute all of that to the omega-3, but I think part of it's there. Part of it's the omega-3 intake. I think that's part
Exactly.
of the reason why Japan did well during COVID too. I mean,
Interesting.
they didn't lock down as much,
Yeah. That's
and
true.
they had very low rates. So did South Korea, also very high omega-3 level.
Huh. Well, I'm just been eating up this conversation, and I know I have to let you go, but you've got interesting research at the Fatty Acid Research Institute, fairinst.org. Is that where we can find more information about
Hmm.
you and what
Yeah,
you do?
right. Fatty Acid Research Institute is what we founded about 4 years ago, and we're continuing to expand the research we're doing there.
Cool. Okay. And they also have I'm going to have a link to that in the show notes as well as omegaquant.com. Yeah,
OmegaQuant.com.
and I forgot you gave me a discount code of 10% off, hack
Oh,
my
good.
age 10, which is there. I'm so happy. I'm definitely going to get that test. I'm going to have links to your Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, all the social medias. Is there anything else that you'd like to stress or say to our audience of where we forgot we're talking to a group of menopausal women, but
Yeah,
we're all concerned about our heart health.
right. I know. Yeah, exactly. And nothing that you've been very thorough. We've covered a lot of ground. I think the most important thing from my perspective is getting your omega-3 index up in that 8% level, however you do it. Whether you do it with supplements, whether you do it with fish, it doesn't seem to make any difference. The higher the level, the better. And don't be afraid of omega-6 fatty acids.
Yeah. Love it. Thank you so much. I will have to have you on again and ask all my other questions. I'm a very
Oh,
curious
happy to do
mind.
it whenever that works for you. That'd be great.
Thank you. And thank you to the listeners who've made it to the end. I know you were just as curious as I was, and we will just stay tuned for much more from Dr. Bill Harris. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Zora.